At my daughter-in-law's bridal shower, they stuck a sticker on me that read, Leech. But they had no idea how much I had already sacrificed for her. The bridal shower was perfect, just like everything else in Abigail's life. Crystal champagne. Flutes caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through the bay windows of Sandra's expansive home. Delicate finger sandwiches and pastries adorned silver platters while fresh flowers perfumed the air. 30 women dressed in their Sunday best chatted animatedly around me. I smoothed down my blue dress, the one I'd saved 3 months to buy, and tried not to feel out of place among Abigail's friends from her country club and sorority sisters. I was determined to fit in for Thomas's sake. "Grace, come join us for the gift opening," Sandra, Abigail's maid of honor, called out. Her voice carried that particular tone reserved for elderly relatives, too loud, too sweet, slightly condescending. Made my way to the circle forming around Abigail, who was perched on a white armchair like it was a throne. My future daughter-in-law barely acknowledged me with a quick glance before turning her attention to the mountain of expensive packages. "This one's from Thomas's mom," Sandra announced, handing Abigail the small box I'd wrapped carefully the night before. Abigail tore through the paper, opened the jewelry case, and pulled out the pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother, the ones I'd promised to save for my own daughter someday. "Oh," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How? Traditional." The women tittered politely. "They were my mother's," I explained, my voice smaller than I intended. "She wore them at her wedding, and I wore them at mine." "That's sweet," Abigail replied, already reaching for the next gift. "But I've actually already picked out diamond drops for the ceremony." The pearls disappeared into the chaos of discarded wrapping paper. 2 hours later, I excused myself to the restroom, desperate for a moment of quiet. As I washed my hands, I caught sight of something in the mirror's reflection, a small yellow sticker on my back that I hadn't noticed before. I twisted, trying to read it. The bathroom door swung open, and I quickly turned away from the mirror. "I can't believe she's still here," Abigail's voice drifted in. I froze, hands still under the running water. "God, I know," Sandra replied. "Did she see the sticker?" They both burst into laughter. "I don't think so. Thomas says she's completely oblivious. Always has been." The Leech label was perfect, though. How much has she borrowed from you guys now? My heart pounded in my chest as I realized what the yellow sticker on my back must say. Thomas won't tell me exactly, but apparently she's always asking for money. Sold her house and still can't manage. He says she's been like this since his dad died. I shut off the water, hands trembling. Poor Thomas, having to support his mom when you guys are just starting out. "It's ridiculous," Abigail sighed dramatically. "She's going to be such a burden after we're married. I've already told Thomas we're setting boundaries once we're back from the honeymoon." I stared at my reflection, face burning with humiliation as tears pricked behind my eyes. The bathroom suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. They had no idea. No idea at all. I had sold my house, not because I couldn't manage, but because Thomas had come to me in tears 6 months ago. Abigail wanted a wedding at the Rosewood Hotel, a venue that cost more than Thomas made in a year. He was devastated at the thought of disappointing her. "I'll lose her, Mom," he had said, his voice breaking. "Her parents expect this kind of wedding. I can't give her what she deserves." So I had sold the home where I'd raised him, the home still filled with memories of his father. I had handed Thomas the $175,000 check and told him it was his inheritance, just coming a little early. "Are you sure, Mom?" he had asked, eyes wide with disbelief. What else would I do with it? I had responded with a smile. "Your father would have wanted you to be happy." I never told him that I moved into a tiny one-bedroom apartment afterward, that I took on part-time work at 63, because my retirement savings weren't enough anymore, that I wore the same 3 outfits rotated carefully so he wouldn't notice, and now I stood in a stranger's bathroom, labeled a leech by the woman my son loved, the woman whose dream wedding was being paid for with the proceeds from the only real asset I had ever owned. I straightened my shoulders, reached back, and peeled off the sticker without looking at it. Then I walked out of the bathroom with my head held high, past Abigail and Sandra, who fell suddenly silent, their eyes widening when they realized I must have heard everything. I didn't say a word. I simply collected my purse, thanked the hostess, and left. In my car, I finally let the tears fall. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "How's the shower going? Is Abby happy?" I stared at his message, my vision blurring. What could I possibly say to him now? The first year after Robert died was a blur of funeral arrangements, insurance paperwork, and endless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how I would raise our 12-year-old son alone. The cancer had been swift and merciless, leaving me, a widow at 42 with a mortgage, a child entering his teenage years, and a teaching salary that barely covered our expenses. I still remember Thomas's face at the funeral. Pale, confused, his tie crooked because his father wasn't there to straighten it. That night, I made a promise to myself. Thomas would never feel the absence of opportunity. I would give him everything, even if it meant having nothing. By the time Thomas started high school, I was working 2 jobs, teaching during the day and bookkeeping for local businesses at night. I'd grade papers during my lunch break and fall, asleep with my reading glasses still on, often waking to find Thomas had covered me with a blanket. "Mom, you don't have to work so hard," he'd say, worry creasing his young face. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just getting a head start on tomorrow," I'd lie, not wanting him to know how tight things really were. When Thomas got accepted to Riverdale University, I sold my wedding ring to pay for his dorm deposit. When he needed a reliable car for his internship, I refinanced the house. Each sacrifice invisible, each one worth it for the pride in his eyes when he called to tell me he'd made the dean's list or landed an interview. He met Abigail during his final year of college. She was beautiful, ambitious, and came from the kind of family that had a summer home and took ski vacations to Aspen. Thomas was immediately smitten. "She's amazing, Mom," he gushed over the phone. "Her father owns half the real estate in Brookfield." "They have a boat!" I heard the insecurity beneath his excitement. My son, brilliant, kind, hard-working Thomas, suddenly feeling inadequate because he couldn't match the casual wealth of Abigail's world. When he called 6 months later, his voice trembling with equal parts excitement and terror, I knew before he said a word. "I want to ask Abby to marry me," he confessed. "But Mom, the ring. Her friends all have these massive diamonds. I've been saving, but—" "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. "Mom, no. I can't take your money. It's not taking if I'm offering," I insisted. The next day, I went to the safe deposit box where I kept the only valuable things I had left: my mother's jewelry, an antique sapphire necklace, a pair of diamond earrings, a bracelet that had been passed through 3 generations. I sold them all to a jeweler in the city. Thomas cried when I handed him the check for $12,000. "I'll pay you back, Mom. Every penny." "Don't be silly," I said, cupping his face in my hands. "This is your inheritance, just a little early." I never told him that those jewels were meant to be my safety net, my emergency fund. I never mentioned that I'd always planned to give the sapphire necklace to his wife someday. Because the look on his face when he showed me the 2-carat diamond ring he bought for Abigail was worth more than any heirloom. Abigail loved the ring, of course. She boasted about it on social media, showing close-ups of the diamond that sparkled thanks to the jewels my mother and grandmother had once worn. She never knew where the money came from. Thomas was too proud to tell her, and I never corrected. her assumption that he had saved for it himself. "Your son is so generous," she told me the first time we met, flashing the ring. "I'm lucky to have found a man who understands quality." I just smiled and agreed. Yes, Thomas understood quality, not the expensive kind that Abigail valued, but the kind that came from sacrifice and love. As their wedding plans grew increasingly elaborate, I watched Thomas stretch himself thinner, trying to keep up with Abigail's expectations. The venue deposit alone was more than his monthly salary. The floral arrangements she wanted cost more than our yearly grocery bill when he was growing up. "I think maybe we should scale back a little," I gently suggested one evening, seeing the strain in his eyes as he reviewed the wedding budget. "I can't ask her to compromise, Mom," he said firmly. "Her parents are inviting all these important clients. It's like a statement for her family." I nodded, understanding suddenly that my son was marrying not just Abigail, but the life she represented. That life so different from the one I had given him. When he came to me about the Rosewood Hotel, desperate and defeated because he couldn't afford what Abigail wanted, I already knew what I would do. The house had been paid off just 2 years earlier, after decades of mortgage payments. It was my only real asset, my retirement plan. But what? Was a house compared to my son's happiness? So I signed the papers, handed over my future, and told myself it was worth it. Every time Thomas called, bubbling with excitement about the wedding plans, I reminded myself that mothers make sacrifices, even ones that remain unseen. And now, sitting in my car outside Sandra's house, the word Leech still burning in my mind, I realized the true cost of my silence. Chapter 3. The Manipulation. I never told Thomas about the sticker incident. What good would it do? He loved Abigail, and I loved him too much to poison that. Instead, I drove home to my small apartment, tucked the memory away with all my other silent sacrifices, and resolved to try harder with my future daughter-in-law. Wedding preparations intensified over the following weeks. Though I had given Thomas the money, Abigail's parents insisted on being involved in every decision, from the flowers to the menu. I was rarely consulted, yet I showed up to every planning meeting with a smile. "Mom, Abby thinks it might be better if you don't come to the cake tasting," Thomas told me one evening, his voice hesitant as we spoke on the phone. "Her mom is bringing her aunt who's a professional chef, and they only have space for 4 people. "Oh," I said, trying to mask my disappointment. Of course, that makes sense. But as the weeks passed, I was excluded from more and more events. The venue walkthrough, the menu planning, the rehearsal dinner discussion. "It's just easier this way," Thomas explained, not quite meeting my eyes when he stopped by my apartment. "Abby's family has connections with all these vendors. They know what they're doing." I nodded, wondering when my opinions had become so worthless, when I had become so invisible. Then came the seating chart discussion. Thomas had promised I would sit at the family table, but one evening he called, his voice strained. "Mom, about the reception seating." "Yes?" I could already feel the knot forming in my stomach. "Abby's parents want to seat you with some of their cousins. They're really nice people, Mom." "But not at the family table?" A pause. "It's complicated. Abby's family is so large, and her dad wants some business associates at the main table. And I understand," I said quickly, though I didn't. "Not really." Then, a month before the wedding, Thomas came to my apartment. His face was serious, his shoulders tense. "Mom, Abby, and I have been talking about our future," he began, sitting stiffly on my secondhand couch. "We've decided to move to Denver after the wedding." The news hit me like a physical blow. Denver was over 1,000 miles away. "Denver?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "But your job is here." Your friends. Abby's gotten an incredible opportunity with her father's company. They're expanding into the Colorado market, and he wants her to head up the new office. And you? He shrugged. I can find work anywhere with my degree. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for us. I nodded mechanically, trying to process the information. My son, my only family, moving across the country. When did you decide this? I asked. Abby's been considering it for a while. She thinks a fresh start would be good for us. A fresh start. Away from me. Later that week, I ran into Patricia, one of Thomas's childhood friends, at the grocery store. Grace! It's been ages, she exclaimed, hugging me. Are you excited about the wedding? Of course, I smiled, the response automatic by now. I was so surprised to hear about the move to Denver. Thomas had always said he'd never leave his hometown. I tilted my head. When did he tell you about Denver? Patricia's eyes widened slightly. Oh, months ago. Abigail mentioned it at her birthday party back in February. She said she had been working on convincing Thomas, but her father had already secured them an amazing condo in downtown Denver. February. 4 months ago. Long before Thomas had told me. Right. I said faintly. They're very excited about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The realization settled over me like a cold blanket. Abigail wasn't just marrying my son. She was systematically removing me from his life. The evidence had been there all along. The way she always had a reason why I couldn't attend certain events. How she'd interrupt whenever Thomas and I reminisced about his childhood. The subtle comments that made me seem needy or difficult. Thomas says you call him almost every day, she had mentioned once, her tone light but her meaning clear. Your mom is so traditional, she'd told our extended family at the engagement party. She just doesn't understand how young professionals live nowadays. Small cuts, expertly delivered, and I had tolerated each one, convincing myself that it was normal mother-in-law tension, that things would improve after the wedding. But Denver changed everything. This wasn't just about wedding plans or family dynamics. Abigail was creating a life where I simply didn't exist. A week later, Thomas called to inform me that they'd decided to spend Christmas with Abigail's family in Aspen. It'll be easier since we'll already be in Colorado, he explained. Maybe you can fly out for New Year's? I clutched the phone tighter. Christmas had always been our special time, even when Thomas was in college. No matter what, he came home for Christmas. Sure, I managed to say. New Year's sounds nice. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the few possessions I had left after selling my home. On the wall hung a single photo, Thomas and me at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. I realized then that I was losing him. Not to a woman who loved him, but to someone who saw him, saw us, as pieces on a chessboard, to be moved or removed according to her grand design. And I had helped finance the whole thing. 2 weeks before the wedding, I found myself sitting across from Thomas at a small cafe downtown. I had asked him to meet me, something I rarely did anymore for fear of seeming clingy, as Abigail had once described me to her friends. Thomas looked tired. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usual vibrant smile seemed forced. He'd lost. Weight, too. His collar hung loose around his neck. Are you happy, Thomas? The question escaped before I could filter it through my usual careful restraint. He looked startled. Of course, Mom. Why wouldn't I be? I wrapped my hands around my coffee mug, drawing courage from its warmth. You seem exhausted, stretched thin. It's just wedding stress, he said dismissively. Everything's fine. I took a deep breath. I need to tell you something. About the bridal shower. Thomas's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. Can it wait? Abby's texting about the florist. No, I said firmly, surprising us both. It can't wait. Please, just 5 minutes of your full attention. He put his phone down, eyebrows raised. I told him everything. The sticker, the conversation I'd overheard, how Abigail had portrayed me as a financial burden. My voice remained steady, even as I described the humiliation of being labeled a leech. At his fiancé's celebration, Thomas's face paled, then flushed with anger. That's not funny, Mom. I'm not trying to be funny, I said quietly. So you're calling Abby a liar? Saying she deliberately humiliated you? I'm telling you what happened. He shook his head vigorously. No. There must be some misunderstanding. Abby wouldn't do something like that. She did, Thomas. And it's not just that. Haven't you noticed how I've been systematically excluded from the wedding planning? How every time we're supposed to do something as a family, there's suddenly a reason why I can't be there. That's ridiculous, he snapped. You're included. You're just being sensitive because Dad isn't here. The jab stung, but I pressed on. What about Denver? You told me it was a recent decision, but Patricia said Abigail was talking about it months ago. You've been checking up on me? His voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. No, I ran into... This is exactly why Abby worries about living. Too close to you, he interrupted. You're suffocating me, Mom. Always have been. I recoiled as if he'd slapped me. Suffocating you? Thomas, I've given you everything. I sold my house so you could have the wedding Abigail wanted. As soon as the words left my mouth, I wished I could take them back. This wasn't how I'd wanted him to find out. Thomas stared at me, confusion replacing anger. What are you talking about? You sold the house because you wanted to downsize. You said it was too big for just you. I sold it because you came to me in tears about not being able to afford the rosewood, I said softly. That money I gave you, your early inheritance, that was from the house, our home. He shook his head in disbelief. No, you wouldn't have. Why wouldn't you tell me? Because you were happy, because you love her. I wanted you to have everything you wanted without feeling guilty. Thomas's face crumpled. For a moment, I glimpsed my little boy again. The one who'd cried when he accidentally broke my favorite vase and tried to glue it back together before I noticed. Then his expression hardened. I don't believe you. You're making this up because you're jealous of Abby, because you can't stand not being the most important woman in my life anymore. Thomas! My voice caught on his name. No, Mom. He stood up, gathering his coat. I know what this is. Dad always said you were possessive, that you'd try to control me my whole life if he let you. The words knocked the breath from my lungs. Robert had never said any such thing. This was Abigail's influence speaking through my son's mouth. Your father loved me, I whispered. We were partners in everything, including raising you. Well, he must have hidden a lot from you then, Thomas retorted, because he warned me about this, about how you'd try to come between me and any woman I loved. I felt dizzy with the pain of it. Not just the lie about Robert, but the realization that Thomas actually believed it. That Abigail had so thoroughly poisoned him against me that he would rewrite his own father's character. I have never tried to come between you and anyone, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. All I've ever done is support you, love you, give you everything I could, including making up stories. About my fiancé? He challenged. Trying to make me doubt her a week before our wedding? I'm telling you the truth. Your truth, maybe. He pulled out his wallet and tossed some bills on the table. I need to go. Abby's waiting. Thomas, please. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Don't walk away like this. I'm not walking away, Mom. You are. You're choosing to create this drama instead of being happy for me. Instead of supporting the woman I love. I've supported her in ways you don't even know, I said, my voice barely audible. Right. His tone was bitter. I'll add that to the list of your imaginary sacrifices. He turned to leave, then paused. Maybe it's better if you don't come to the rehearsal dinner. I don't want any tension before the wedding. I sat frozen, watching him walk out of the cafe and out of my life. The son I had raised alone, the boy for whom I had sacrificed everything, now believed me to be a jealous, manipulative liar. Outside the window, I could see him on his phone, probably calling Abigail. His gestures were animated, angry. I knew. He was telling her about our conversation, knew she would be comforting him, reinforcing her narrative about his possessive, delusional mother. I paid the bill and walked slowly to my car. For the first time since Robert died, I felt truly alone. I had lost everything, my home, my savings, and now my son. All because I had loved too silently, sacrificed too invisibly. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would not fight anymore. I would not force Thomas to choose. I would step back completely, give him the space to live his life, even if it meant watching from a distance as Abigail systematically erased me from it. I would attend the wedding, smile, for the photographs, and then let him go. Because that's what mothers do, even when it breaks them. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunny and mild, just as Abigail had demanded of the universe. I sat in the third row, not with family, but with distant acquaintances. Thomas hadn't uninvited me from the wedding itself, but the message was clear. I was a guest, not the mother of the groom. I wore a pale blue dress I'd found on clearance, my hair done by my own hands rather than at the salon where Abigail's mother and bridesmaids were being pampered. No one had invited me to join them. In the church, I smiled and nodded at people I barely knew. Thomas's college friends, co-workers, old neighbors, they all greeted me warmly, seemingly unaware of the growing rift between my son and me. Mrs. Wilson, you must be so proud, said Michael, Thomas's roommate from college, sliding into the seat beside me. How's it feel seeing your boy all grown up and getting married? It's wonderful, I replied automatically. The words practiced and hollow. Michael studied my face. You okay? You don't seem like yourself. Just emotional. You know how weddings are. He nodded, though his expression remained concerned. Thomas is lucky to have you. He used to talk about you all the time in college, how you worked yourself to the bone to give him opportunities. My throat tightened. That was a long time ago. Still, Michael continued, he told me about the house. I froze. What about the house? That you sold it to pay for this wedding. Michael gestured around the lavishly decorated church. He said he tried to talk you out of it, but you insisted. That's serious mother love right there. I stared at him, speechless. Thomas had told Michael the truth, but why had he accused me of making it up during our confrontation? Before I could ask, the music changed, signaling the ceremony was about to begin. Michael squeezed my hand and moved to his assigned seat. Throughout the ceremony, my mind raced. Had Thomas known all along? Had he lied to me at the cafe? Or had he somehow verified the truth afterward? When Thomas recited his vows, his voice strong and clear, I felt both pride and a painful distance. My son, my whole world, pledging himself to a woman who saw me as nothing but an inconvenience. At the reception, I sat at a table far from the wedding party, making small talk with people who kept asking why I wasn't sitting with my son. I offered vague explanations about limited space at the head table, keeping my dignity intact, even as I watched Abigail's extended family occupy the places that should have belonged to Thomas's side. I was picking at my barely touched cake when a shadow fell across my table. I looked up to see Kevin, Thomas's best friend since childhood, standing there with 2 glasses of champagne. "This seat taken?" he asked, handing me one of the glasses without waiting for an answer. "It's all yours," I replied, grateful for the familiar face. Kevin sat down heavily. He'd clearly had a few drinks already, his tie loosened and cheeks flushed. "Some wedding, huh?" He surveyed the opulent ballroom. "Must have cost a fortune." I nodded noncommittally. "You know," Kevin leaned in, his voice dropping. "Thomas was freaking out about the money. Said he was going to have to cancel the whole thing, get Abigail a ring from a pawn shop instead of that rock she's wearing." I sipped my champagne, saying nothing. Then suddenly, he's got all this cash. Venue deposit, paid. Diamond ring, paid. Honeymoon in Bali, paid. Kevin shook his head. I asked him if he robbed a bank. What did he say? I couldn't help asking. Nothing at first. But then after a few beers one night he broke down. Told me his mom, you, had sold your house to give him the money. Kevin met my eyes directly. He was ashamed, Grace. Said he felt like the worst son in the world for taking your home. My hand trembled, champagne sloshing over the rim of my glass. He told you that? Kevin nodded. Swore me to secrecy. Said Abigail could never know. That she thought the money came from some investment that matured. He told me he didn't believe me, I whispered, more to myself than to Kevin. When I mentioned selling the house, he accused me of making it up. Kevin's brow furrowed. What? When was this? 2 weeks ago. We had an argument. I told him about some things Abigail had done, things she'd said about me. He got angry, said I was jealous and making up stories. When I mentioned selling the house, he acted like it was news to him. Kevin set his glass down. That doesn't make sense. He's known for months. He felt terrible about it. Then why would he? Kevin, there you are. A young woman in a bridesmaid's dress approached our table. Thomas is looking for you. It's almost time for your speech. Kevin stood reluctantly. We'll finish this later, okay? But as he walked away, I already knew. Thomas hadn't forgotten. He hadn't misunderstood. He had deliberately lied during our confrontation, choosing to deny the truth rather than acknowledge my sacrifice or Abigail's cruelty. I sat alone, watching the celebration unfold around me, feeling more isolated than ever. Across the room, Thomas and Abigail danced, her diamond ring catching the light, the ring purchased with my mother's jewelry. They looked happy, lost in each other, while I was lost in a different way. Then I noticed Michael approaching Thomas during a break. In the dancing, they spoke briefly, Michael's expression serious, Thomas's face changing from confusion to concern as the conversation progressed. Thomas looked in my direction, our eyes meeting across the crowded room. For the first time since our argument, I saw something other than anger or dismissal in his gaze. I saw recognition, and suddenly, I understood. Thomas had known all along about my sacrifices. He had been grateful, even guilty. But acknowledging them meant acknowledging Abigail's lies, her manipulation, her cruelty toward me. It had been easier to pretend, to accept her version of reality where I was possessive and delusional. Because the alternative, that he had chosen a woman who would humiliate his mother, who would isolate him from his only family, was too painful to face. As Thomas started walking toward my table, his expression troubled, I realized the moment of truth had finally arrived. Thomas stood before me, a strange mix of emotions playing across his face. Guilt, confusion, a hint of defiance still lingering in the set of his jaw. The reception swirled around us, but in that moment, it was just mother and son, facing a truth too long denied. Mom? He began, his voice barely audible above the music. Michael said you were upset. that you told him about our fight." "I didn't," I replied calmly. "He knew about the house. He said you told him months ago." Thomas paled slightly. "Can we talk somewhere private?" I followed him to a small anteroom off the main ballroom. As the door closed behind us, the sounds of celebration muffled. Thomas seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping forward. "Why did you lie to me, Thomas?" I asked softly. "At the cafe, when I told you about selling the house. You acted like you didn't know." He sank into a chair, running his hands through his carefully styled hair. "I don't know. I panicked." "Panicked about what? The truth?" "Abby was so upset after you called," he admitted. "She said you were trying to come between us, that mothers always get jealous when their sons get married. She was crying, saying you made up the story about the sticker to hurt her. And you believed her. It wasn't a question." He looked away. "It was easier than believing she would do something like that. That she would. That she would deliberately humiliate your mother? Lie about me being a financial burden? Systematically cut me out of your life?" Thomas flinched. "She's not. It's not that simple." "It is that simple," I said, my voice steady. "You knew I sold the house. You knew I gave you that money for the wedding. But when confronted with Abigail's behavior, you chose to deny what you knew was true." "I didn't want to lose her," he whispered. The raw honesty of it struck me. My son, so strong in so many ways, terrified of losing the woman he loved, even if it meant betraying his own mother. "Thomas," I said gently, "if telling the truth means losing someone, they weren't yours to keep." He looked up, tears in his eyes. "What do I do now?" "That's for you to decide. But I want you to know this. I didn't sell my house hoping for gratitude or recognition. I did it because I love you, because your happiness matters to me more than anything." "Even now?" His voice cracked. "After how I've treated you?" "Even now," I confirmed. "But loving you doesn't mean I'll accept being disrespected or pushed aside. By Abigail or by you." Thomas wiped his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know how to fix this." "You start by being honest. With yourself, with Abigail, and with me." A knock on the door interrupted us. Abigail stood in the doorway, her wedding gown gleaming under the chandelier light, her expression hardening as she took in the scene. "Thomas, everyone's looking for you. It's time to cut the cake." Her eyes flicked dismissively over me before returning to her new husband. Thomas stood, his posture straightening. "Abigail, we need to talk." "Now?" she asked incredulously. "In the middle of our wedding reception?" "Yes, now." His voice was firm in a way I hadn't heard in months. "My mother and I were just discussing how I've been lying to you." Abigail's eyes widened. "Excuse me? The money for this wedding, for your ring, it didn't come from my investments. It came from my mother selling her house. The house where I grew up." Abigail's face flushed. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm done pretending. Done acting like my mother is a burden when she's given me everything." He turned to me. "Mom, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want everyone to know the truth." Before I could respond, he took my arm and led me back into the reception hall, Abigail trailing behind us, her perfect composure beginning to crack. Thomas clinked his glass, calling for attention. The crowd quieted, all eyes turning toward us. "I want to make a toast," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "To my mother, Grace Wilson. Most of you don't know this, but this beautiful wedding wouldn't have been possible without her sacrifice." A murmur ran through the crowd. Abigail's parents exchanged confused glances. "My mother sold her home, our family home, to give me the money for this wedding. She moved into a tiny apartment and never complained. never asked for recognition, Thomas's voice caught. And I repaid her by allowing her to be disrespected and sidelined. I squeezed his arm, overwhelmed by his public declaration. Thomas, you don't have to do this. I do, he insisted. It's long overdue. Across the room, Abigail stood frozen, her expression a mix of humiliation and fury as whispers spread among the guests. Her mother approached her, speaking urgently in her ear. So please, Thomas continued, raise your glasses to Grace Wilson, who taught me what love really means, and who deserves far better than how she's been treated today. As glasses lifted around the room, I saw something shift in the way people looked at me. No longer the sidelined mother, but a woman who had made an extraordinary sacrifice for her son. The reception continued, but everything had changed. Abigail's parents approached me with stiff apologies, clearly embarrassed by the revelation. Guests stopped by my table to chat, no longer treating me as an afterthought. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, Abigail cornered me near. The ladies' room, her perfect facade cracked by anger. Are you happy now? She hissed. You've embarrassed me at my own wedding. No, Abigail, I replied calmly. I'm not happy that my son married someone who sees his mother as an enemy. But this isn't about happiness anymore. It's about truth and respect. What do you want from me? She demanded. Nothing, I said simply. I don't want anything from you except basic decency. Thomas loves you and that won't change. But how you treat me, that has to change. She stared at me, searching for weakness, finding none. Fine, she finally muttered, for Thomas's sake. It wasn't a heartfelt reconciliation, but it was a beginning. 3 months later, much had changed. Thomas and Abigail did move to Denver, but not before we had several honest conversations about expectations and boundaries. Thomas insisted that I visit regularly, and to my surprise, Abigail made grudging efforts to be civil, if not warm. I used part of my retirement savings to make a down payment on a small condo near my sister in Arizona. I started painting again, something I'd abandoned after Robert died. I joined a community theater group and made new friends. I built a life that wasn't centered entirely around my son. When Thomas called, as he did several times a week now, there was a new openness between us. He'd acknowledged the truth of what happened and understood the depth of my love without taking it for granted. Mom, he said during one of our calls, I've been thinking a lot about what you said at the wedding. About how if telling the truth means losing someone, they weren't yours to keep. And, I prompted gently, I'm trying to live by that now. With Abigail, with work, with everything. It's harder, but it feels right. I smiled, hearing the growth in his voice. I'm proud of you, Thomas. Abby asked if you'd come for Thanksgiving. He continued, surprising me. She said, and I quote, your mother should be with family for the holidays. It wasn't an apology or a declaration of affection, but from Abigail, it was significant progress. I'd like that, I said. That night, I sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still moments when I remembered the humiliation of that sticker, the betrayal of my son's denial, the loss of my family home. But I had gained something precious, the freedom that comes with being valued for who you are, not just what you can give. The knowledge that love doesn't have to be silent to be strong. Sometimes the price of love is letting go, not of the people we cherish, but of our need for their validation. In standing up for myself, I had taught my son his final lesson, that true love respects boundaries, acknowledges truth, and honors sacrifice. And that was worth everything I had given.